Welcome to my driving and racing video covering demos from Steam Next Fest February 25 to see whether I like them and they stay on my wishlist, or whether I boot them off because I didn't like them very much or ran into lots of problems. To manage expectations, there are no sim racing games in this video. It is all about party, arcade, kart or intriguing variants of racing games because there wasn't any sim racing games this time round. Let's kick off with Deliver at All Costs. I really loved the trailer for this when it came out. It's an isometric-y racing delivery game where everything in the world is totally destructible. So you can smash into trees, phone booths, buildings, and cause lots and lots of carnage, run over everyone, and then they get angry and chase you with chainsaws or try and kick you and push you over if you get out of the car. This is a comedic, hilarious world, but it is so satisfying to play. The driving physics remind me heavily of Hotrod Drift from Fun Selector, and I love that game, and this feels like a toned down isometric 1920s real world version of that, where you're going around meeting various crazy and kooky characters, smashing up everything, then beating up all of the people that you've just run over as they try to get you back. And it's just such a joy to play. This game has levity in spades, but the gameplay to back it up. And I found it absolutely engrossing and will absolutely be buying this on day one. Whilst technically racing, we are going on to the ski slopes for Descenders Next, where we're going snowboarding down a mountain. This is the sequel to Descenders, which was a BMX racing downhill game, and I love that. And Descenders Next has that SSX chef's kiss in terms of handling and predictability and just sheer speed, and then realising you've gone way too fast and you're going to commit absolute murder for yourself when you smash into various different objects on the mountain. What I really liked about this was how in control I felt of my rider, so long as I was paying attention, because you use the left analog stick to kind of steer in direction, but then you can dig in by doing left and right analog sticks together to kind of slalom your way around. And there's so many different varieties of events. Some of it was kind of more open across the mountain, some of it was more slalomy, some of it was more trick based, some of it was more timing based, and you had different trails that you could choose to get from A to B across just the demo itself, let alone the actual game. I was engrossed. It was challenging because one problem and you will stack it and you need to restart that area again, and if you restarted too many times it would airdrop you back to base, and then you'd be like, no, I've got to do the run again, which is kind of similar to how Descenders ran as well. But yeah, I really enjoyed this, and again, it's going to be another day one, and it's coming out in April and it feels well ready for it, so excited. Next up in the driving rather than the racing section is Fumes. And Fumes reminds me of Mad Max crossed with Scavenger's Run, if you remember that in the PS2 era, where everything is geared towards vehicular combat. So you are driving forward, and it took me a while to get used to pressing basically like L2 or left trigger to be able to go forward, which just goes against every principle I have. But then the right trigger was to shoot, and so you're moving around with the left analog stick to steer, the right analog stick controls the direction of your turrets, and different vehicles would come at you with different attacks to try and take you out. So some would have chainsaws at the front and they'd try and ram you and cause you damage that way. Others would shoot at you. And then all of a sudden this ginormous, massive mechanical tank comes over and you're busy trying to shoot off all of the different gun turrets, then trying to get like a cable up so that you can then fling onto its actual mainframe, and then driving around taking out other enemies whilst still inside a giant tank moving forward around the massive level. This initially looked a little bit too dirty and almost PS3 graphic-like, but then I totally understood why, with the sheer scale and craziness of what was going on around you. It was responsive, it was fun, it was chaotic, it was at times like, ooh, moments would pop up, particularly at that giant tank. And yeah, I very much enjoyed this one too, and I didn't think I would, and this performed way better and had me more engaged than I thought it was going to. So 2 thumbs up from me. Fumes, coming out I think later this year. Next up is Tiny Racing, which is an expansion of Tiny Racer, which I've already put a review on this channel, which was a free-to-play itch game, and it's now being developed into a fully fledged release. This was a very short demo of just one track with some variants of day and night cycles. Everything that I loved about the free version is carried over into Tiny Racing. I will still say that the AI is too easy, but outside of that, this feels like a planted arcade top-down racer that's just very simple to pick up and play. I don't think it will change the world, but it's certainly one of those, like, you could park a couple of hours and then have some good multiplayer racing here, because all of the cars are super, super sticky to the track, and that makes for good racing. The next game that I thoroughly enjoyed is Neon Apex Beyond the Limit, and this is what I would consider Redline the arcade racer. And the idea is that you're in this kind of anime metropolis area that's like an autobahn in a way, or a freeway, where you're constantly having to shift lanes between going against or into the traffic, depending on what lanes are open and shut as you go around the different racetracks. As you do so, slipstreaming has got a huge benefit here, and you can drift and try and get around the tracks as well. But what you do when you finish the race is then collect various different cards that you can take to your garage and then upgrade your car, or just repair damage if you've been a bit crash happy, or increase the rigidity and ability to be able to soak up damage. There's lots of different things that you can do. The game also flips you between cars and bikes, and they do handle slightly differently, but this was a really fast-paced, stylish, fluid, easy to pick up and understand, and very responsive racer. And whilst I did have a little bit of a question mark over the fact that all of the races seem to be going around variants of the same layout of track, and that could potentially feel a bit samey, I was too engrossed in the speed and velocity of what was going on around me to really care too much. And so Neon Apex Beyond the Limit was a definite surprise hit for me during this video of racing and driving games. Next up is Wheel World, which also surprised me too, as it's a pastel-coloured open-world BMX racing game with a story attached to it. You take control of a character who finds an abandoned bike that's possessed by a spirit called Scully, and between the pair of you, you set off on adventures around this island that keeps opening up and opening up, as you then discover other people on the island who also are BMX fans and take place in various checkpoint races. As you do so, you unlock bells by ringing them that unlock other spirits of the island that then increase your boost meter. And your boost meter gets built up by drifting to some degree, but also through slipstreaming. And slipstreaming in this game is exceptionally powerful. And so being able to work out when to slipstream and then duck out and overtake other racers is crucial and key. And also being able to do some tricks to boost your meter as well, so that you can then really pound it when you're going up the hills, is crucial and key too. This game handles exceptionally well, and there's a few games that have done this kind of BMX open world environment before, but this felt really fleshed out, well put together. The handling and physics felt consistent and steady. And yeah, I just really enjoyed being in Wheel World. So this is absolutely staying on my wish list and is yet another day one. The potential last day one game on this list for me is Recharge. Now, I really like RC racing games. There's a couple of them out there that I dive in and out of repeatedly over time, but I'm lacking one that is really easily accessible, that gives me a more of a simmy experience, whilst also providing some challenge that isn't you have to go online and find other players. And this is where I think Recharge comes in. Yes, it's got online, and I did go online and race with a couple of people, and it handled it exceptionally well. But what Recharge does is kind of produce a real-world Simcade style handling of an RC car in crazy real-world environments that shouldn't really be racetracks. So one was in a stadium, and it's exceptionally bumpy with lots of like hills and hurdles and humps and camel bumps to get over. And then there was one inside a skate rink where you're going up and down half pipes on hairpin bends and things like that. And I really enjoyed the level design. The handling felt really nippy, just like an RC car should, where it snap oversteers at the drop of a hat. And so you're really having to think about, do I want to hang on the brakes and potentially spin myself round and cause myself carnage? Or can I hang on round the outside and get away with it? I really enjoyed this game, definitely staying on my wish list. I hadn't heard of it until Steam Next Fest, so this was again another great surprise for me and one that I'll be very happy to dive back into. I tell a lie, there is one other game that really stood out for me as well, and it's called Hotrod Mayhem. This is a traditional kart racer for 1 to 4 players, local split screen, but all of the gameplay you'll see here is single player mode. What I really liked about this is the on the ground, really grippy controls, a very consistent drift mechanic, which then generates your boost meter. But also there was lots of in-world game environments that you can interact with that then also increased your boost meter, but often came at a slight price. So in the Chinese level, you would be smashing various different gongs, which would slow you down if you hit them, but you'd get an instant full boost meter, which then means that you could then go on attack and get things back again. But if someone hits the gong before you, the gong flies up, and so everyone else that's just behind misses it. So it's always a little bit of a back and forth around, you want to be there, but not quite. The game's AI were very missile happy when you're in the lead, but I could kind of cope with that if there was a bit of a tweaking, I would say, of the AI and its aggressiveness. But the tracks were vibrant, colourful, interesting and well themed. I like the fact that there's forward, reverse and then twisted levels, which is where you can kind of fork off in the road and basically have half the team on one side and half the field on another, and then you can kind of choose your own way through as the environment forks out into different paths. I just thought it was a really well put together kart game. So Hotrod Mayhem, 2 thumbs up. I thought Oldtimer Transport was going to be a kart racer too, and it turns out it's not. It's an arena-based race 'em up, collect 'em up and drop 'em off game, which I appreciate is not probably the most simplest way to describe something. But in this game you play as someone that's got a truck at the back of their car, and an alien is busy depositing various different old people around the map. You need to work out where they're being deposited, drive over to them, pick up 10, and then try and drive back to the depot to drop them off back home again without losing them by either smashing into various different bits of scenery. And then there's events that are triggering all the time to try and get in your way. So it might be like bomb barrels are dropping from the sky, or it might be that there's some other players that are going to try and ram you and cause you some problems. And every time you hit something, some of the old timers fall off the back. So it rewards precision, but the way how the arenas are set up, it means that you've got to do some drifting and some boosting and or some tricks to try and then get the boost to do the jump to launch over the gaps to get to the depot. So it's always a risk versus reward type of scenario, whilst everyone else is trying to drive around too. I found this fun for a couple of minutes, but even during the first 5-minute playthrough that I had, I could start to see that the premise didn't have enough variety or high stakes in it for me to be fully invested. And so I could see this game getting quite stale quite quickly unless there's a variety of different arenas or players that are highly competitive. And there's no AI in this game, so I think I was struggling a little bit personally with it just being me going around trying out the game. So maybe that's part of the problem, but Oldtimer Transport didn't really gel for me, and so I have removed it from my wish list. I've also removed GEOJET from my wish list too. And this is a kind of corridor racer game where you're tasked with trying to collect various different pickups whilst also blasting forward through ever-changing environments with really tight gaps or moving platforms that get in the way that you need to kind of dodge in and out of. Initially, I quite liked GEOJET, but very quickly I found that actually it was making me feel quite motion sick. And the reason why is because you're constantly having to go up and down and like higher and lower in the level, whenever you stop moving higher or lower, it's as if the game's trying to course correct the camera, and it kind of floats behind and made me feel quite unwell. And because the levels get more and more complicated, it was doing it more and more, and I was feeling very queasy after about 5 minutes, and I thought, you know what, this isn't working for me, stop. That camera movement and the fact that it kept on recourse correcting, and sometimes it felt like it was trying to get back down to a base height again without me telling it to, was getting really in the way of just me being able to complete a level too. And so I became quite frustrated with GEOJET, uninstalled it and removed it from my wishlist, probably not to touch it again. In a complete change of pace, SCIFI Racing Team is basically Wipeout Manager Simulator, and I think there's some really good stuff here, but it needs something more to be able to convey what's actually going on in this game. At the start of the game, you pick your team name and colours and a livery and a brand name, and then you grab some drivers, and there's a couple of different leagues for you to choose from. Some of them have engine and chassis suppliers, some of them expect you to build some headquarters to make your own, and then once you pick some drivers, you then go into qualifying and a race. There are about 15-16 teams that will pitch one of their 2 drivers forward to the race, and then the race will take place, but you don't see any of it. You just get a chart at the end which shows the stats of what happened, and it's that hands-off approach that makes A, the game exceptionally quick to get through, but B, feels almost too hands-off for you to know that you're definitely making a difference, because aside from choosing when in qualifying you want to go out and get a hot lap, and I really do mean hot lap, because part of the conditions as you're going around this futuristic racing environment is what's the weather like, and if it's icy cold then your car might have slightly different attributes compared to whether it's hot, and the driver has different conditions where it can maybe deal with hot conditions and not cold, and maybe your car's the other way round, so you need to kind of align everything so that you do well. And outside of kind of looking at those stats, it felt too hands off and didn't really give me enough feedback around what I was doing well or not well, and it felt a little bit too random. I did like the idea though, so it's staying on my wish list and I'll keep an eye on it. One game that didn't stay on my wishlist though is Pico Drift, and this feels like budget Need for Speed open world environment with various different checkpoint races and just an open world rummage around with lots and lots of different cars to play with. It felt a little bit too lo-fi for its own good. And the Pico series is one that I've kind of dipped in and out of occasionally over time, and I find them exceptionally middling, and this just really confirmed my theories and thoughts on it. It was fine, the handling felt okay, but I found that I was able to cut most corners on tracks to try and get a faster time, and it didn't really feel particularly satisfying or well fleshed out in the world that I was driving around. And if you're going to do something that's open world, if you leave it really sterile and bland, it becomes very empty very quickly, and that was my problem with this game. So it has been removed from my wish list, but it might be just because it's early days and it needs an awful lot of work. On a similar theme, Pizza Delivery in a Storm also has a totally bland and open world environment that feels so empty and sparse, it's really sad and underwhelming. But the game itself has lots and lots of comedic chatter, it's got a stupid slapstick vibe to it all, and actually I quite liked what was going on around everything else except for the driving. The motorbike racing that you do to deliver pizzas is so skiddy and drift-worthy that when you're trying to turn a corner, it's all around like trying to weigh up the balance of your bike. But if you do so, then it just overturns and you splat on the floor and that's it. So I found myself having to kind of like edge the controller, for want of a better phrase, to try and like hobble round a corner, and it felt really uninspiring and unsatisfying to play because I never felt truly in control and everything felt like I was just driving on soap. And I personally struggle with soapy physics, and this is like soap extreme version. I have kept it on my wish list though, because I was genuinely entertained with everything else that was going on around it. And there's something for me about I like post-apocalyptic things and disaster movies. So having this all take place in a storm where like the wind is trying to blow you over and things like that kept me very entertained. Next up is Rekt Party, which is a sequel to Rekt. Now, I quite enjoyed Rekt, and Rekt Party feels like a good extension of that original premise. It drops you into arenas for you to then take part in various challenges. And the difference between this one, say, versus Oldtimer Transport, for example, earlier on in the list, is that these maps feel really well designed to allow you to go absolutely nuts and try out various different moves, spins, barrel rolls, boost jumps. There's a stupid button that you press that then like makes the wheels go up on their side as if you're trying to do like a kind of ollie or something like that. It's just stupid fun, but it's incredibly approachable to play, and the handling just makes so much sense. But what's really key here is that you can be dropped into arenas with 7 other players. You're all busy triggering your own high score events. You can kind of lock it out and see if you want to chase your own high scores in whatever time limit you're putting on. And it just felt really well put together and designed. But particularly it's down to the level and arena design that allows you to find your own flow in how you're going to perform all of these stunts. And that was the real key to what made Rekt Party fun. So absolutely staying on my wish list. I'll be keeping an eye on it. Next up is Soul Riders, and this demo only worked for about a minute and a half before it kept crashing, so you'll get very little gameplay here and comment. It's a mini game party-esque style game about collecting various power-ups to make your car more and more improved and better, to then take place in like races on a much more wider scale. That's what I think was going on anyway. The handling was okay, the graphics were okay, it all felt a bit glitchy and like it couldn't really support itself as I was playing. And so I've not kept it on my wish list, but I'll probably pop back to it when it's closer to release to see what on earth the game actually was, because after playing it repeatedly, the same 90 seconds over and over again, I still didn't really know, so the penultimate game on this list is Delta Vector Turn-Based Racing. And this is a racing game, but think of it like the board game Formula 1, where you're putting down like, I'm going to go forward and to the left, and I'm going to increase my speed, and therefore I'm moving forward a certain amount of squares or spaces to then get round the track. Each time trial was asking you to complete a lap within certain moves, and then there's like a race mode where you could go up against other people, and as they move forward you need to kind of not crash into each other, so on and so forth. I really like this concept, and I've got a couple of other games already that follow this exact premise. My main piece of feedback for this game is the UI of the controls is really confusing, because it follows this 9 3x3 grid system where, depending on where you're orientated, you're either staying at the same speed and staying centre, left or right, going faster by pressing the furthest ones away and then left and right, or slowing down and pressing the buttons nearer to you, left and right. But when you're slightly turned to the side, it's really unclear what your moves are actually doing. And if that can be sorted out and made more clear, then Delta Vector Turn-Based Racing I think will be a great addition to this turn-based racing subgenre of games. But until that gets sorted, this is too rough around the edges and confusing to recommend. The last game on this list is Horse Racing Manager. And bizarrely, in this demo, there was no management at all. Instead, what you did was pick a horse or pick 2 horses to breed and then get that horse out onto the field, and you pressed a button to make sure it got out of the gates, and then you was using the left and right arrow buttons on the keyboard to control its stamina to then know when to replenish stamina or when to make a dive for the end. Bizarrely, I actually quite enjoyed this, and it's staying on my wish list, but I'd like to know what else there is from a manager's perspective out there, because this would get very boring very quickly if that's all you're doing. But I quite liked the whole setup of things. It reminded me of Sport of Kings or Derby Day on the Spectrum, and I have some happy memories of that game. So yay for me, a no for everyone else maybe. And that's my racing collection. A couple of games here that I really want to call out, and they're largely all at the beginning of the video, but Deliver at All Costs, Descenders Next, Fumes, Tiny Racing, Neon Apex Beyond the Limit, Wheel World, Recharge and Hotrod Mayhem are all games that I will definitely be buying. And then there's probably Rekt Party and Delta Vector Turn-Based Racing are the other two that I'd be kind of going, ooh, quite like I'll be having those on my list as well. So let us know if anything catches your eye down in the comments. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you again soon on Higher Plane Games. Cheers. Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/Higher Network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching.